it's Kim at Foggy Bonnet. I'm an independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator. Today I'm going to show you how to make a card that I presented on my Facebook Live this past week. I'm going to recreate it today. This is the card. I'll be using different papers today, but I wanted to show you the card I made for the Facebook Live. It's a gatefold and it has a really interesting moving part on the inside. It's a shutter that opens, so this is called a gatefold shutter card. As you can see, the inside opens like a camera aperture to reveal a sentiment inside. So I'm going to show you how to make this. I will have all of the cutting dimensions in the description of this video, and you can find the description below the video on YouTube. There's a down arrow. You click on that and then you'll be able to see everything beneath the video. We begin with a piece of cardstock that measures 5.5 by 8.5 inches. That's 5.5 by 8.5 inches, and it's been scored at 2 1/8 inches from a short side. So we're going to fold the cardstock on that score line and just burnish. Next, we're going to bring the right side in to meet the edge of that folded over flap. You could score this at 2 1/8 from the other short side, but if you have your measurements off even a little bit, you're going to end up with either a gap in between the two flaps, or they'll overlap, and you don't want that. So we're just going to bring this in so this opposite edge meets the flap we just made. And I like to just butt the two ends up together and then just use my bone folder to press down in the middle. And then you end up with a pretty perfect seam there between the two flaps. Next, we'll be working with two pieces of the same color cardstock that are cut to 3.5 by 4 inches. They're both the same dimension. That's 3.5 by 4 inches. And these are scored at 1/2 inch from a short side, which is the 3.5 inch side. So you just come in 1/2 inch and make a score line from the short side. Both of them have that score line, 1/2 inch from the short side. We're going to find the middle of each of these pieces of cardstock, and we'll do that by drawing a mark using a ruler that's laid from one corner to the opposite diagonal corner. So just like this, we're going to make a mark. I have my ruler on these opposite diagonal corners. I'm just going to make a pencil line. Then I'm going to lay the ruler across these other two diagonal corners, and where my two lines cross will be the middle of this piece of cardstock. So I don't know how well that's showing up on camera, but I've got an X there that marks the middle of this cardstock, and I'm going to repeat that on the other piece of cardstock. So I'm going to lay the ruler from one corner to the opposite diagonal corner and just make a mark on the cardstock, and then I'm going to lay the ruler across the other two diagonals, the other two diagonal corners, and where those two lines meet is the middle. Next, we're going to cut out this section from the middle, or where my two lines crossed, from the middle of the cardstock out to the corners. And we're doing the corners that are opposite the score line. My score line is up here. I'm going to cut out a section on the opposite side. And what we're making here are the pieces of the shutter. You see those little cutouts there? That's what we're making. I'm going to use my paper trimmer to cut the cardstock. I could use paper snips, but I get a better line. I get a straighter line, I should say, when I use my paper trimmer. So I'm just going to line up where those two lines cross and a corner of this cardstock. And remember, I'm working on the opposite side from where this score line is. So I get that center point and a corner lined up inside the cutting guide here, and I want to make sure I bring my blade down inside the area I want to cut. And I'll just snap the blade down, snap the guide down and let the blade pierce the cardstock. You don't want to start your blade off of the cardstock and bring it up on that corner, because you will crumple the corner. So you want to start the blade inside the area that you're cutting and cut off of that corner instead of cutting into it. And then just bring your blade up to where that two lines cross that you made. And you might have to back it up just to check. There we go. And then now just cut from the other corner up to the center. I try to get things lined up first. I'm lining up this corner with the cutting guide and where my two lines cross. So I get all that lined up. Then I bring my blade up and just set it down. And then I cut off of the paper or the cardstock and then up to where those two lines intersect, a little at a time. And if I need to, I can use my paper snips to finish the cut, but it looks like I got it cut just fine. Okay, so there's one. Now we're going to do the other one. So here's my X. So I'm going to cut from this X down to both corners on the opposite side from where this score line is. I don't know if you can see that score line. I'll fold this a little bit so maybe that'll help you see it. All right, so I'm going to line this X up on my trimmer and this corner. Okay, so this one I have just a little bit of cardstock hanging on, so I'm going to use my paper snips to just finish that cut. There we go. Okay, so now I have the two pieces of the shutter that will open and close in the card. Okay, and the next thing I'm going to do is put some Designer Series paper on the front panels of my card. If you're using directional paper, you want to make sure that you cut your paper so that the pattern reads up and down vertically on your card front. And if you're careful when you cut, you can have the pattern kind of flow across the paper as mine does here. It's a pretty busy pattern, so it doesn't really show up that much, but I do have a continuous pattern here that flows across the front. So I'm just going to adhere this paper using my Stampin' Seal. And the paper that I'm using for my example today is the hand-penned Designer Series paper. It's new in the 2021 to 22 annual catalog. It's one of my favorites. I really like it. It has a watercolor look to it with black outlines. So that's why they call it hand-penned. Very pretty. So I'm just going to center my pieces on these flaps. There's about 1/8 of an inch border around. The Designer Series paper is cut to 1 7/8 by 5 1/4. Again, the cutting dimensions will be in the description down below this video, so you'll be able to check that out. There we go. So this one goes on the other flap. And I open these flat because it's easier for me to adhere things when I'm working on a flat surface. So it should look like that. Then we're going to create the centerpiece of our card, which I'll show you on the one I already have made. It's this piece, and it's going to have a circle cut out of it. But the first thing we do is adhere the designer series paper to the cardstock. So this is a 3 by 5.5 inch piece of cardstock and a 2 3/4 by 5 1/4 piece of the same designer series paper. So I'm just going to adhere this and leave an even border all the way around. And I'm pretty generous with the adhesive because I know I'm going to be cutting a circle out of this, and so I want enough adhesive in enough places so that even after I cut the circle out of this, it will still lay flat. So I'm just centering this. There we go. And I'm going to use a circle die from the Layering Circles die set. And the one that I use to cut the circle out is 2 3/8 inches in diameter. So it lays on here just perfectly and leaves just enough border on either side. While I'm die cutting, I'm also going to cut a second white circle, or a second circle of basic white, and this will be, oops, can't pick it up, there we go. This will be for the sentiment on the front, same size as what I'm using to cut the circle out of this, and I'm going to cut a third time with a slightly larger circle. I used the 2 5/8 inch straight side circle die for this cut. And this piece will be used to place the sentiment on the inside. I also cut a piece of the same cardstock that my card base is, using the scalloped circle from the same set, and this is the 2 3/4 inch scallop circle, and it goes behind the sentiment on the front. Whoops, it goes behind the sentiment on the front of the card. I've cut out my circle from my center piece that I will be using on the inside, and you can save your circle for another project. The next thing I want to do is adhere this piece to the inside of my card, and I'm going to adhere it with Stampin' Dimensional so that it sits up off of the card, but I'm only going to tack it down on the bottom for right now because I'm going to need to get in behind it to assemble the rest of the inside of the card. So I'll go ahead and put Stampin' Dimensionals on the back of this at the top and the bottom, and I'm using regular size Stampin' Dimensionals. I'll just put 3 along the top and 3 along the bottom. And again, I'm only going to adhere the bottom for now. I'm not going to adhere the top because I'm going to need to work inside behind this piece. So I'm centering it between the 2 score lines on my card base, and I'm lining up the bottom edge, and then it's the same height as the card, so the top edge is lining up also. Okay, so now it's adhered on the bottom, but I can still get in behind it. Next, we're going to adhere our shutter pieces behind this piece. So you want to fold and burnish on that 1/2 inch score line that you made. So fold it and give it a good burnish. You want this to be well creased, and you want your pencil lines to be on the back, or you could erase them, but you're folding, the back of this will be actually the side that you folded your tab over to. That will be your back, okay? So this is the top, this is the back. So you're going to lay this right here, and again, I'm just going to repeat this because this is important. The way you folded your tab to is the back. So that's what you want to have face down. But you lay it so the tab is out flat, and you want to center the point And I'm just going to slip a piece of white cardstock in here so you can see this easily. You want the point of this to be centered top to bottom in the circle. And you want the edge of this piece, let me slide the white over, to line up with the score line in the flap of the card. So you have this point centered top to bottom in the circle, and you have this right edge of your shutter lined up with the score line on the flap of the card. So I'm going to take this out, and I recommend using tear and tape for this. It needs to be a strong adhesive. So I removed the shutter so I can apply the tear and tape, and I'm putting the tear and tape on this tab. All right, it's plenty wide to accommodate the tear and tape, and I'm going to just remove the backing while I have it out here. And now I'm going to position it again the way I showed you just a second ago, with the point of this shutter centered top to bottom in the circle, and the right edge of this shutter up against the crease on the right side here, the score line. Okay, so that looks pretty good. That's centered top to bottom. Then I'm just going to bring this flap over and lay it down on that tear and tape and press. And now this shutter is adhered to the right flap. You see how that worked? Okay, so we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to just fold this tab to the back, and I'm going to burnish it pretty good. And I have my pencil lines on the back. That's the side I folded my tab to, so I don't have to worry about erasing those. So that's the back, the side that the tab folds to, and you want that facing down. So I'm going to go ahead and put my tear and tape on this shutter. And this time we're going to come in from the left side behind the first shutter that we've put in there. And here we want to pay attention to also lining the two shutters up. You don't want a piece, let me see if I can get some white cardstock to show you. You don't want a bit of the shutter above the first one that you put in. So you want to line those up. I'm looking at this right here. So I'm lining those up, and that's going to line up these points as well. There we go. And I also want to line up, oops, I'm stuck to it. I want to line up this left edge of my shutter with this score line on the left. So I'm looking, do I have the two shutters lined up? Do I have this left edge lined up with that score line? And it all looks pretty good. So I have it all in place. I'm just going to lay this left flap down, rub it on the tear and tape, and now the left shutter is adhered to the card base. So the final thing I want to do is, before I adhere this piece, is put the sentiment in behind the shutters. So this sentiment is going to get stamped on the larger of the two circles, the two white circles that I cut. This is the 2 5/8 inch circle, and I put it on a slightly larger circle so that I would have room to kind of negotiate the position back here. So I'm going to stamp my sentiment, and I'm using Happy Mother's Day today from the Timeless Tulips stamp set. Happy Mother's Day. I'm going to use Memento Tuxedo Black to stamp my inside sentiment. And these are photopolymer stamps, so I can see through them and just kind of center this on the circle. And the nice thing about using a circle here is that no matter which way I stamp, the sentiment's always going to be straight because it's on a circle, and I can just adjust it when I adhere it inside this opening. So what I'm going to do is put adhesive on the back of this circle, and I'm using my Stampin' Seal again here. And then I'm just going to pick this up and let it stick to a finger. And I'm just going to slide this in behind everything and position it in the opening there. It's stuck to my finger, so I can kind of move it around. And when I have it where I'm happy with it as far as the position inside this opening, I'm just going to press down on it so it adheres to the back of the card. And there we go. So that's all that's going in there. Now I can remove the backing from these 3 Stampin' Dimensionals and adhere this piece completely now to the back of the card. Just like that. So now we have our sentiment inside there. Next, we're going to create the sentiment for the front of our card. So this is the smaller of the 2 white circles. Let's see, this is the one that was 2 3/8 inches in diameter, and it's going to go on the scallop circle. The sentiment that I'm using for the front of my card is "You Mean So Much to Me" from the In Bloom stamp set. I'm going to use the Memento Tuxedo Black again for this sentiment. And I'm going to stamp kind of down and to the right because we're going to be putting flowers on this piece also. So I'm going to keep my sentiment kind of down here to the right. And I'll go ahead and adhere this to the scalloped circle. Just centering it in there as well as I can. And I have a few flowers cut ready to put together and put on this piece. These flower dies came from the In Bloom bundle that coordinates with the In Bloom stamp set where the sentiment came from. The die set is actually called Pierced Blooms, and it's a very generous die set. There are tons of pieces in here. You can do so much with these. So that's where the flower and the centers came from. And I just chose colors that coordinate with my paper. I have Highland Heather, and I think this is Blushing Bride. So I just need to attach the centers of my flowers, and I'm going to use liquid adhesive to do that. Just like that. And then I will adhere these to the front. I like to put one on the surface and then pop one up on dimensionals. I have 2 more of the same type flower for the inside of the card. One will go up here and one will go here. And I made a little element where I can sign my card, and I made this with the oval punch. It cuts both a scalloped oval and a smooth side oval. So I cut one out of Blushing Bride and then a white. And so I'll just adhere these inside of my card like that. There are a couple of things you need to keep in mind when you're adhering elements on the inside of this card. And one is you want to make sure you don't get any adhesive on these shutters, okay? Because you don't want to stop them from moving. They have to move freely. And the other thing is you need to watch, because where this crease meets the flap of the card, that actually comes in as you shut the card. And so you can't have anything extending over too far, because that crease, the edge of that shutter where it folds over, will hit the element. So you want to just keep enough clearance there. So I'm just going to adhere one flower up here on the top right. And again, I'm just using liquid glue, and I'm just going to be careful not to get any on my shutter. And I'll let it overlap this piece a little bit, but I won't go over too far. And then I'm going to adhere this piece down here. And again, I'm going to allow it to overlap just a little bit, but not so far that that seam hits it. And I'll be careful where I place my adhesive, keeping it away from the shutter. Okay, and then the last flower will just overlap that signature piece down here, and I'll let it extend off the left a little bit, not too far. Just like that. And then I'll close everything. Whoops, now see, I do have, this piece extends just a little too far, so I'm going to move that over. It was hitting, the edge of this was hitting it when it closed, so I needed to move that in a little bit. There we go. Okay, now everything's clear. Yeah, you just want to double check everything to make sure the mechanism is still working. So that's perfect. Whoops. So next we want to make the final piece, which is the belly band that goes around the middle. When I have gate folds like this, I like to use belly bands because they don't always stay closed. Now there is enough friction with this card. It actually makes a sound as it opens that it does stay closed better than some, but not all the way. So we're going to add a belly band, and the two pieces for this are a piece of, let's see, 9 3/4 by 1 3/4 inch cardstock, and I have scored this 3 inches from one of the short ends. So it's 9 3/4 by 1 3/4, scored 3 inches from a short end. Okay, and I can just gently, I don't want to burnish this, I'm just going to gently fold it back. And then I have a piece of 10 inch by 1.5 inch designer series paper, and it is not scored at all. Ooh, that's pretty. I might use the back of that. Yes, I think I will. That's so pretty. So this is the back side of the paper I used, and I love how that coordinates. So I'm going to use that piece. And the way I do mine is I adhere one end of my designer series paper only, just one end of it. Whoops. And I might just lay down 2 strips of Stampin' Seal. I'm going to line up the end of this designer series paper with the end of my cardstock and just kind of tack it down. And then I want to make sure that I keep it centered the rest of the way down. See how it's centered on this piece. So next, what I want to do is I want to use this 3 inch mark to start my belly band, and I'm just going to wrap this around and bring the designer series paper with it, just using my fingers to gently crease the designer series paper. And then on this side, I don't have it scored. I'm just going to wrap it around and let the paper and the cardstock fold together. Okay, and that way the crease in the cardstock and the crease in the paper will be in the correct place, in the right place. So once I have the creases made, I'll go ahead and tack down this other end of the designer series paper, but I want to be careful because it's kind of off a little bit. I want to make sure it's still lining up, that it's still centered. Okay, so there we go. So I'm going to put a little bit of adhesive right here on this flap of the cardstock and tack down that end of the designer series paper. And I'm trying to line everything up. This is going to get covered by the sentiment piece, but I'm still trying to line it up. Okay, so I have it tacked down. Now I'm just going to trim off this excess piece of designer series paper. Remember this was a little bit longer than the cardstock. So I'm just going to trim this end off like that. And now I can adhere the end of this end to this end of my belly band. And I don't want it too tight because I want this to slide on and off easily. So for this, I'm going to use tear and tape. It's a good strong adhesive. And I'm just going to work with the band on the card. Make sure I get my tear and tape where it's going to overlap. Okay. I'll just take the backing off of that. And this will create a good strong bond. So again, I'm just being careful to line everything up. There we go. And that seam now will be covered by our sentiment piece. Okay. And I'll just attach this with liquid adhesive, I think. Might use tear and tape actually to do that. So I'm just going to put a couple of strips across the middle where I know it's going to rest on the belly band. Just a couple of strips. And then I'll remove the backing. If you've gone over with your tear and tape, just fold it back on itself. Okay, and I'm going to adhere this. Oops, I have it a little crooked, but I think I'm okay. The tear and tape I have a little at an angle. So I'm just going to center this, and I'm lining up the sentiment so that it's straight. There we go. I'm going to check the back of this and make sure there's no tear and tape exposed. There's not. And here's the inside with that really neat shutter opening. Just a fun card to give, and like I said, not too difficult to make. If you enjoyed today's project, subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can easily find future projects that I post. Remember, you'll find the cutting dimensions in the description below, and you'll also find links for finding my blog and for signing up for my newsletter. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you again soon.